All right, guys, so today we're going to be learning about personality. And so I thought for today I was going to go through the PowerPoint and I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the things that I have posted here. So before you watch the part of this video where I talk through the actual PowerPoint, I'd like everybody to go here to this personal or personality activity link. This is going to be like a personality questionnaire. So go through and answer all of those questions. There's 44 of them. Just answer as honestly as you can. I'm not looking at your answers. Nobody else can know your answers. So just answer it as you would normally if you're just being honest. Important, when you go through this activity, you're going to want to make sure you keep track of your responses. So at the end of the survey, you'll get an email that has all of your responses for each question. But if you would rather write your answers down to the side of the survey, or you can do what I did, and you can just copy and paste the email that you get right into Excel. And so I've put this kind of template up. So this has the question, the answer that you would put, and then there's some scoring stuff we're going to have to do that I'll walk you guys through later. So if you want to just go through, here are the different questions. You can go ahead and just put your answer. It's a scale of 1 to 5 here next to it, and then that will help you before you get into this PowerPoint to kind of be prepared for what we're going to talk about. So to get started, as I said, today we're talking about personality. Let me get this going. So the survey that you guys will take before you listen to this is called the Big Five. And so the Big Five is kind of like the standard for personality research. And what's happened is people were generating so many different types of personality questionnaires that it was kind of hard to sort out what people were talking about when they answered these different questions. And so over the past, I don't know, 50, 60 years, maybe longer than that, maybe 8, I don't know, for a long time, people have been kind of trying to compile these different personality questionnaires and kind of deduce what are the 5 or 6 or just however many personality traits that really we think mainly contribute to personality. And there are obviously other ones, but what you'll see here is that we have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And within each of these, there are more personality traits, right? So these are kind of like 5 umbrella terms. And within each of those, you could pull apart a whole bunch of different things. So if you see a personality trait and you think one and you're like, wow, that's really important, likely that is already included in one of these categories. And so the questionnaire you just took was trying to measure your dimension for each of these different traits. And what's really interesting about this is that they found that these traits are pretty stable across your lifespan. So they can change a little bit, but typically people that are going to be high maybe in agreeableness when they're 15 will also be high in agreeableness when they're 45. So that's really cool. So what we're going to do now is walk through how you're going to score the questionnaire and the responses that you wrote down when you did the survey before you listen to this. And then we'll kind of talk through what correlations are with each of these personality traits, or we can talk about kind of what this might mean as we go through each. So to start, we're going to talk about openness. Now, so when you looked at your responses, you'll see that there are 44, but we're trying to map these onto 5 dimensions of personality. And so there's going to be some items that go to openness and some that go to agreeableness and so on. So here, these are just the actual instructions if you were going to do this all by hand, but I have uploaded an Excel sheet that's got some formulas plugged in, so it'll auto-calculate for you. The one thing you're going to have to do by hand is you're going to have to reverse score. And so this is a key for that. So any of these questions up here that have an R next to them, they need to be reverse scored. What that means is the question might be trying to get at how friendly you are, right? So the question could say, how likely or how much do you agree with a question or the statement, I am friendly to everybody? And if you were highly friendly, you might put 5, right? I'm highly friendly. But the other way to get at that, and this helps with like reliability and how people answer, is to make it the inverse. So you could say, I'm rude to everybody, agree or disagree. And in that case, if you were a very kind person or a very friendly person, you would put a 1, right? Like, you're never rude to anybody, I disagree. But what we're getting at here is the same thing, right? Although somebody that answers a 1 on that kind of negative question, they're still trying to say the opposite, right? They're very friendly. And so for those questions, instead of putting a 1 into our score, you're actually going to want to put a 5 into your score, because those are the questions that are actually getting at like high in friendliness, just like the normal ones. So what we're going to do, and what I'm going to show you, is I'm going to walk you through the Excel sheet that I've made. If you guys want to use that, you're more than welcome to. If you don't have any interest in using that, you, again, don't have to. And so I'm going to walk through how to calculate each of these, and then we'll talk about what each of these different personality dimensions means. Okay, so let's go here to this. Is this one I need? Yes. So as I said before, here are the different questions we have. And then if we go over here to score your responses, this is where you guys are going to enter your different responses, and then you can see what your scores are. So you know the answers can range from a 1 to a 5. And so first, I would plug all of your answers into here, answers, right? This is just a column that doesn't have any formula plugging into it. Just feel free, plug it in there, and be good to go. All of these lines that I have highlighted in blue, these are all the ones that need to be reverse scored. So you can see here that I have answered a 5 for number 2, and I just did this arbitrarily. But what I need to do to reverse score it is do the opposite. So 5 becomes 1, a 4 becomes a 2, a 3 stays the same. So here you can see a 3 that I reverse scored, still 3. And then 2 becomes a 4, and a 1 becomes a 5. And so you can see here that on all these blue ones, I have inversed my score. Then for these ones that are not highlighted blue, you're just going to track the same score across to this answers rescored column. This is going to be the column that helps you determine your score for each of these different dimensions. So over here, I've already, as you can see up here, made a formula that's pulling only the questions for openness, and then you have to divide it by the number of questions you put in there. That's going to give you your average score for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and eroticism. And these are the scores we're going to be talking through during the lecture, and it's also what you're going to need when you go on to other activities later in the PowerPoint. So you guys can do this. I've uploaded a blank version of this to TCU Online, so all you have to do is just keep track of your scores, plug them in for the appropriate questions, rescore the ones in blue, and it will automatically give you your scores. So now let's go back to our PowerPoint, and we can talk about what each of these would mean. So what is openness? Openness is this idea that you might be open to new experiences or thoughts, or you're very curious, right? So all of these are going to have an average of 3. So if you have a score of more than 3, that means you are high on openness. And if you have a score less than 3, then you're low on openness. And now some of these personality traits seem like, oh, it might be bad to be high or it might be bad to be low. That's not necessarily the case. All this is saying is there are people fall across the whole spectrum of these traits, and we're just trying to figure out what things normally track with a high openness trait or a low openness trait. So if you had a high openness trait, you might be highly creative, might have a lot of imagination, you might be really into art or music. People that are high in openness tend to be more attentive to how they feel, or have a preference for variety. They also tend to be pretty curious, right? So they're open to these new intellectual experiences. So being high in openness, so when I say correlated, this is really important. This does not mean that because you are high in openness, it causes you to have high creativity. It just means that people that have more openness on this dimension also tend to have more creativity, more intelligence, more, and spirituality is, it's more kind of this idea of like believing in like a greater power and not necessarily religion. And so these are all things that are positively correlated with openness, right? So the more open you are, the more you might display these other characteristics. Whereas if you maybe have less openness, so this is where this is going to get tricky, because what this is saying is not people that have low in trait openness are more likely to be religious fundamentalists. It means that the more open you are, so the higher you score in openness, the less likely you might be to be a religious fundamentalist. But this is just a correlation, right? So people that score high in openness also might show less prejudice. They might show less authoritarianism. And what's interesting is there's no gender differences here. So both men and women score and have these similar correlations, which you'll see is different for these different personality traits. Okay, so next we'll talk about conscientiousness. Again, if you're scoring by hand, here's how you go ahead and do that. If you're using my Excel sheet that I made, you can just see your score. Again, this has got an average of a 3. Showing more of one thing or showing higher than a 3 means you displaying more conscientiousness, less would be less conscientiousness. Mostly conscientiousness is kind of this idea of having high amounts of, not courtesy, but kind of like evaluating your work and self-control, and trying to be maybe conscious of how your actions influence yourself or others or situations, right? So they have, they make deliberate actions, they might have high self-control, they might be perfectionists or workaholics. And those that have low conscientiousness might be a little more laid back, right? They're not so driven by this deliberate need to consciously act on things, but they might just be less driven by deadlines. They might be less goal-oriented. None of this being bad in any way, just differences in how we see people behaving, right? And so conscientiousness is correlated positively with, so here's it's going to flip, right? So if you score high in conscientiousness, you might also score high in life satisfaction, success in the workplace. You might have difficulty dealing with stressful events because, right, all of your actions are very conscious and intentional. However, here, let's say you have low conscientiousness. Low conscientiousness may also be associated with higher levels of substance abuse, or maybe higher levels of unemployment. This is not to say that if you scored low on conscientiousness, you will be employed. It's just saying these are things that might track together in a way that is different than those that have high conscientiousness. All right, so now this is going to be, next is extroversion. So again, here are the questions for that. Okay. All right, so when we think about interpreting extroversion, this is exactly as you would think it is, right? Some people that are extroverted, so they score greater than a 3, are going to be your extroverts. They're going to be the people that are talkative, they want to be around people, they don't get afraid in crowds or around new people, and they might be bored really easily when they're alone. However, introverts are kind of the opposite of that, right? They might prefer to be alone or with small groups of friends. They might feel overwhelmed if they're in large crowds. And so this has also been correlated with some different things. And so I found this to be interesting. So just because you're shy doesn't necessarily mean that you're an introvert, right? It's just means that you might have some greater fear of interaction and not that you don't like being around people. Okay, so extroversion is highly positively correlated with satisfaction in your life and kind of social desirability, whereas introverts might have a positive correlation with giftedness or intelligence or higher academic performance. And so sometimes being an introvert is maybe thought to be less socially desirable, but that's not necessarily true. And that's also to say being an extrovert doesn't mean you can't have high academic performance, and being an introvert doesn't mean you can't have high satisfaction in life. These are just things that generally, when surveyed, people will put high things here and high things here, or they might be low in introversion and also put high in academic performance. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is agreeableness. Now, agreeableness is not necessarily being friendly, but I think it's kind of like this need to appease others, perhaps. So if we look at this, people that are highly agreeable are often very cooperative, they have a lot of trust and honesty with others, and they show a lot of empathy, whereas those that might be lower in agreeableness might tend to be more competitive or skeptical of other people's motives, right? So agreeableness is kind of this, how are you going to interact with others? Kind of the dimension that this is getting at. Neuroticism, so this is, the word makes it sound really bad. This is kind of like anxiety, right? Like, how are you dealing with stress? So if we look at this, highly neurotic individuals might show greater ranges of emotion. They might not react well to stress. They might have a hard time controlling their urges, whereas those that are low in neuroticism might become more calm in stressful or rough situations. They might have more emotional stability. So that's neuroticism, and you'll see people typically that have high neuroticism, like I said, have more correlations with anxiety, anger, and depression, where those with low neuroticism might have less vulnerability to depression or higher life satisfaction. Now, so this, as I said before, most people fall somewhere near a 3. If you don't fall somewhere near a 3, that's totally fine. People fall across the whole range of this scale, but most people hit right at a 3. And these are just correlations, as I said. This is what I was talking about the whole time. Just because you score high or low on one of these traits does not mean that the things that are correlated with it will happen to you or that you will do them. It's just something that tracks together. And as I also said before, these are pretty stable across age, which is pretty interesting. I mean, they fluctuate some, and sometimes there are cultural variability in how people display these traits. However, typically, you'll kind of be this way in your personality throughout your lifespan. All right, now we're going to talk some about gender differences. So as you can see here, some of these have male scoring higher, like extroversion. Some of them have female scoring higher, like agreeableness or neuroticism. And then some of them don't have any difference at all. And so I'm not entirely sure why different genders might score differently. I suspect that one component of this is that this is self-report, right? So when you go and answer this questionnaire, you are thinking about your own personality, but you're also thinking about what would be desirable, right? So men might find that extroversion is a trait that makes them more socially desirable. And so they might just score themselves higher on that because it's self-report, as compared to females might say, you know, it's very socially desirable for me to have a lot of these traits that fall into agreeableness. And so they might be overscoring their actual performance. It could be that there are actual differences here. I think it's probably a social desirability thing. Neuroticism, it might be that this is how it is. It could also be that we talked about evolution before. Typically in an evolutionary, from evolutionary perspective, females would be the ones that are like cared for in a relationship. So maybe there's some weird desirability thing happening here. All of this to say is people differ on this, sometimes just because of their own individual differences, and sometimes they differ on things because of overarching gender differences, or maybe there's cultural differences. So there's that. So now what we're going to do is there's this really cool survey I posted on TCU Online, and it's going to look at how your taste in music might relate to your personality. And I didn't know Ryan Gosling had this questionnaire. Apparently that's where this came from. So the link is there. This is going to be part of your discussion question. And so I'm going to show you guys, I took it, so I'll show you what it looks like. And then I'll show you what you guys want to do with it. So I'll show you how it goes, and then I'll talk through the discussion questions, okay? All right, let's come over here. can't see anything. Okay. So here is what the survey will look like. I've already done it, so I'm just gonna walk you through kind of what I am expecting. So when you do this survey, you can see that a lot of the questions are about what type of music you like. And then there are some questions that are getting at the components of the Big Five that we just walked through. So make sure you do the Big Five survey before you do this one, because then you can just plug in exactly like, yes, I know I'm high on introversion, or maybe I'm high on agreeableness, maybe I'm low on eroticism. So it's gonna ask for that information, and then it's gonna tell you what your music says about your personality based off these 4 characteristics or dimensions, right? So reflective and complex, edgy and aggressive, fun and simple, and energetic and upbeat. And then if you scroll down, it'll walk you through each of these 4 dimensions, right? So I'm high on reflective and complex. And what that means down here is, okay, maybe that means that I tend to be open to new experiences, creative, intellectual, and enjoy trying new things. They might also say down here, after a hard day of work, you might enjoy a documentary. That to me seems pretty accurate. So if I were gonna go and do the discussion question, what I'm asking you guys to do is take this survey, and then, as I said, use the results of the personality activity to help you complete the music survey. Then I want you guys to make a discussion post onto the personality discussion board on TCU Online. And in your post, I just want you to pick one of those dimensions. So if I was doing this, I would pick reflective and complex music. And I would use that, I would just discuss my results for that dimension. And I would say, you know, I agree, I think I am high in a dimension of this variety. And it makes sense to me that my taste in music would tell that. I'm not asking you to reply to anybody else's post because I'm also going to ask you guys to do a little bit of work on your final presentation this week. So this is going to count towards one of your participation points, and then the other one I'll explain at the end of the lecture. So just go ahead and do that, post it up there. No need to reply. I just want to hear what you guys' thoughts are on this music personality overlap. Okay, the other thing I included, I just think this is fun, and since we're all at home, I think we have a great opportunity to look at this if you're interested. There's recently been a lot of research on dog personalities, and so I posted a PDF version of the dog personality questionnaire, and the scoring is underneath that. You absolutely don't have to do this, but if you're at home and you have your pet there and you want to see what your dog personality is like, that's up there just for fun. We don't need to talk about it. You don't need to tell me you've done it. I just thought it might be interesting. If you have any questions and you'd like to ask them, I'm happy to field them, but this is just an interesting thing I thought I would add. All right, so there are some other types of famous personality tests that we're going to talk about. One of them is the TAT, and the other one is this Rorschach ink blot test. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk really quickly about Myers-Briggs. So Myers-Briggs is a really, really famous personality test, and it, to me, is very similar to when I got on my soapbox about learning styles. So Myers-Briggs is totally not a valid form of a personality test, right? It's got way too many options. And typically, if you're gonna go through, you could just randomly answer a Myers-Briggs test and we'll give you a little paragraph about yourself. That paragraph applies to everybody, right? They've intentionally made these tests so that it's so generalized, anybody could find something that they feel is accurate for them. That's not an actual personality test. That's just you as the person taking the test looking for information that will apply to yourself, even though everybody could find information that applies to themselves. If you don't believe me, go and take a Myers-Briggs test. Take one time intentionally and take another time randomly, and then take another time randomly. And you'll see that the responses are so similar that you're like, it means nothing. But that's just my 2 cents on Myers-Briggs. All right, so now we're gonna talk about, okay, one second. Okay, so, sorry, I had to move the Zoom thing because I couldn't read. So thematic a perception test. So this is called a projective test. And what this means is that instead of asking people to self-report aspects of their personality, it's asking people to kind of answer these arbitrary questions maybe, and then a therapist or the researcher would take those responses and try to get at specific levels of the participant's personality that might be unconscious or that they might not necessarily reveal on a self-report test. So what this, the TAT is getting at specifically is you might be shown a picture down here in the corner, and then your job as the participant would be to come up with a story for what happened right before this image, what's happening during the image, and what's happening after the image. So you have to come up with a complete story about these characters, what they're feeling, what they might have been doing. And then as a researcher, you would try to somehow tease apart what that meant about maybe people's relationships, their emotions, conflicts, or personality. So here's another example of a picture. The issues that come up with tests like this is they're really hard to figure out what people are actually feeling, right? So if I said here, maybe this woman is, I don't know, trying to get this man's attention because maybe they have a romantic relationship. Me coming up with that tiny little blip of a part of a story, what does that say about me? And how, as a therapist, can I actually deduce what that statement or sentiment means about my personality or emotion? And it's pretty subjective. So typically this type of test is used more to help to establish a relationship or trust with a researcher or with a therapist or counselor, and not necessarily as a diagnostic tool like the Big Five or the one we did at the beginning. Okay, another test that's interesting is the Rorschach ink blot test. Most people have seen these before. It was originally came up with it to diagnose schizophrenia. I'm not sure how this test can diagnose schizophrenia, but that was its intention. And so the idea is just that people would show you these ink blots, and that you would then come up with image to you, right? Do you think this is scary? Whatever, right? And there are some really interesting ones here. Why is this not working? All right, so there are even more. I'm not really sure what type of things are normal for people to see in these images, but I think most people are familiar with this as a personality test. Okay, so as I said before, you're going to do one of your points for this week's participation points is going to come from the music and personality discussion post. The other one is going to be here. I'd like you guys all this week to pick your final presentation topic. This doesn't need to be a big thing. I've made an assignment on TCU Online. It's just a text box. I just want you to type in what you're going to do your final presentation on. As a reminder, this can be anything we've covered in the class so far in lab. And next week, we're going to be talking about psychopathology, so things like schizophrenia, different psychological disorders. So if you have an interest in that, feel free to pick an option or a topic from that area as well. So yeah, so that's going to be the other points you get. So just submit that final presentation topic. I'm going to go through and read them. If I see anything that stands out to me as maybe not relevant to the class, or if I see something that I think wow, I don't know how the heck you're going to possibly make a talk on that, I might let you know. If I tell you specifically you need to change your idea, you need to resubmit a different idea. If I express concern about an idea, I would highly encourage you to change your topic. But if you don't hear from me at all, then you can just assume that your final presentation topic is accepted, okay? All right, so I think that's all I have for today. I'm gonna post these slides up on TCU Online so you can absolutely go back through, look at them. If you have any questions on how to score this, this survey, just let me know. I'm happy to help you guys do that. And yes, I think that's all. All right, guys, have a good rest of your day. Bye.